الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. To continue in the study of the science of hadith in the book Nukhbatul Fikr Al-Hafidh ibn Hajr rahimahullah. Last week we discussed Al-Jahala, or a few weeks before we discussed Al-Jahala, when a narrator, his affair is unknown to us. His affair is unknown. Either he himself is unknown, his that, his essence is unknown, so we don't know how to rule against him or rule upon him, or he has been narrated from by one person, so he's unknown to us, which is Majhul Ayn and Majhul Al-Hal. So we'll go quickly through it. He says the anonymous narrator, the Majhul or the Mubham, is not accepted even if he is mentioned anonymously with a grading of a commendation. This is according to the soundest opinion. Meaning, if someone says he Muhammad ibn Abdullah, for example, and you don't know who he's talking about, then he is Majhul, he's Mubham. You don't know who in reality is being referred to here. Who is Muhammad Abdullah here? You don't know who is being referred to. So because you don't know who is being referred to, just because someone says this specific Muhammad ibn Abdullah is thiqah, doesn't affect anything. Rather, his narration is still, according to the correct stance, not accepted. Because from the condition of authentic narration is what? What is from the conditions of a narration to be accepted? From the 5 conditions, what are they? Adala. You have to have trustworthiness. If we don't know this Muhammad Abdullah specifically, how do we know if he's trustworthy? How do we know his precision? So because he's mubham, he's unknown to us, so we cannot grade upon his narration. We cannot grade upon his narration. Then he says, if the narrator is mentioned in the chain and only one person narrated from him, then he is Majhul al-Ayn. In this specific narrator, only one person is narrated from him. Only one person has narrated from him, no one else. And there's no praise for him from someone who is, his praise is accepted. So what is correct regarding this kind of individual is that his narration are not accepted. Majhul al-Ayn, keep that in the back of your mind, that wording, Majhul al-Ayn, his narration is not accepted. Why is that again? Because we don't know his adala. We don't know if he's trustworthy or not. And we do not know his precision in regards to narrations. The next one is, if 2 or more related from one narrator, and he is not explicitly declared reliable, then he is called Majhul al-Hal. And similarly, he is called Mastur. Now, Majhul al-Hal, he is acceptable in mutaba'at and shawahid. What does that mean? Umar, what does mutaba'at and shawahid mean? If I say to you, acceptable mutaba'at in shawahid, what does that mean? طيب, Majhul al-Hal, if he is 2 people narrate from him, but we don't know his situation and his condition, if their supporting routes regarding this narration is accepted. If their supporting routes support his narration, then it is accepted. But he himself is not accepted. By himself is not accepted, but if their supporting routes that support his narration, then it is accepted in mutaba'at and ash-shawahid. That is the affair of Majhul. Then he says bid'ah. As for bid'ah, the one who commits an innovation, then there's 2 types of bid'ahs. One is bid'ah mukaffara. A bid'ah which takes one out the fold of Islam. And the second one is bid'ah mufassaqah. A bid'ah that a person does not take one out the fold of Islam, but is an evil doer due to it. He's an evil doer and a sinner due to it. As for the first one, then majority of the scholars, they say, if someone has a bid'ah mukaffara, that he has a bid'ah of disbelief, his narration is in totality rejected. His narration in totality is rejected. If someone does a bid'ah mukaffara, for example, some of the Khawarij, some groups of the Khawarij, they reject Surah to Yusuf. They reject Surah to Yusuf completely. Anyone know why? Why they reject Surah to Yusuf? Because the Khawarij do not believe in rahmah. They don't believe in mercy, and they say there's too much mercy in Surah Yusuf. That specific group, not all Khawarij agree to that, but a specific group from the Khawarij, they say that, example, Surah Yusuf is not accepted. Or if someone says today that Surah Al-Dhuhr is 5 rak'ahs, and it is clarified to him that that's haram to say, and there's only 4 rak'ahs, and he does not accept that, that is what? That's kufr. That's a bid'ah mukaffira as well. So if someone falls into affairs like that, then his narrations are in totality rejected. They're not accepted from him. They're not accepted at all. What about the second group? The second group are those who have not disbelieved, but their innovation has led them to major sins. For sins, the categorization of sins are as follows. Number one is shirk akbar. Major shirk is the biggest sin. After that is shirk asghar, minor shirk. After that is bid'ah. After that is an innovation. After that is innovation. For innovations are more severe in sin than a major sin. Understand that. Why? Because the innovator thinks he's doing good. وَهُمْ يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ يُحْسِنُونَ صُنْعًا. They think that they're doing something good. As for the major sinner, he knows he's wrong. He may commit zina, he may drink khamar, he may do something wrong, but he knows he has to repent to Allah. As for the innovator, he thinks he's doing good. Instead of repenting, he's calling others to his innovation. Instead of repenting, he's encouraging his innovation and calling others to it. So this kind of individual who is an innovator and he has fisk or innovator of fisk that does not leave the fold of Islam, then the scholars, they say, if he is someone who is not inviting to his innovation, mind you, this is we're talking about narrative hadith. We're not talking about innovators today. There's a difference between the innovators today and innovators of those who narrated hadith. We're going to clarify more inshallah, but they said the narrator who is not inviting to his innovation, then his report is accepted. His report is accepted according to the most correct opinion. If a narrator is known to be trustworthy and he is not calling to his innovation, then his narration is accepted. Unless he narrates something supporting his innovation, then in that case it is rejected according to the most correct stance. For example, a Shi'i. The Shia, they're different. Some of them are Rafida are kuffar. But some of them, for example, like the Shia in the past, their bid'ah was that they thought Ali was better than whom? Uthman. So this kind of individual, if he came within a hadith that didn't support this innovation, we would say to you what? If he was trustworthy, it's accepted. But if he wasn't trustworthy and he brought it, or if he's trustworthy and he brought a narration in support of Ali, we would say what? It's rejected unless there's supporting routes to clarify that this narration is actually an acceptable narration. For that reason, Imam Muqbil rahimahullah said that if the narration of the trustworthy innovators were to be rejected, most of the sunnah would have been rejected or lost. For that reason, this innovator, if he does not ascribe it to his innovation, and it isn't that which takes one out the fold of Islam, then what is correct is that his narration are accepted, except if it is in accordance to his innovation. This is the correct stance of the scholars. Then he says, the Shi'i, if he reports a narration in accordance to his madhab, then we withhold regarding it. We withhold regarding it. We don't believe it. We don't believe he is lying, but we withhold and similar other than him from the innovators. He said the innovators consider a fasik, and some of the scholars did not accept the narration of those innovators in totality. Some scholars' stance was there that any innovator, his narration to reject in totality. But as we mentioned, the correct stance is if he is trustworthy and he is not narrating according to his innovation, is accepted. Why? Because a lot of the sunnah has come by way of those who are trustworthy, but they had some kind of innovation. For that reason, the scholars, they turned a blind side to it. They turned a blind side to it and took their reports. Now, this is not like the innovators today. This does not permit one to go so with innovators today. This is regarding people who are trustworthy. And the narration came only by route of them. And they were trustworthy. Today, knowledge, for example, someone wants to learn ilm al-fara'id, knowledge of, for example, the inheritance, Ahlul Sunnah have it too. You don't have to go to innovator today. For example, Arabic language grammar, you don't have to go to innovators. Ahlul Sunnah have that too. Aqidah, Tawheed, Fiqh, everything you want of usul and ilm al-usul and ilm al-ala, knowledge of the foundation and knowledge of the tools that get you to knowledge, Ahlul Sunnah have all of them. There's no need to go to innovators. But what happened here was that this narration came from someone trustworthy. And only they had this narration. So in order to not let a sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ narration go to waste, the scholars were forced to accept his narration and turn a blind eye. And turn a blind eye to his innovation, so long as he wasn't supporting his innovation and he was a trustworthy narrator. This does not permit anyone today to go still with innovators. For that reason, the same narrators that narrated from those innovators, they also warn from innovators. They also warn from taking from Ahlul Bid'ah. Ibn Abbas said, لا تجالس أهل الأهواء فإن مجالستهم ممرضة. Do not sit with the people of innovation, for sitting with them sickens the heart. فإني لا آمن. Some of them said, I did not feel safe for someone to sit with the innovator, except أن يغمسوه في بدعته. Except that he's going to put you into his innovation. And this is the real situation of those today, the foolish ones who go sit with innovators. Today they say, I'm only learning Arabic, and tomorrow they're celebrating Mawlid, or they're celebrating other things with the innovators. Why? Because the innovator is not going to stop from calling to his innovation. The innovator thinks he's upon the haqq. The innovator thinks that what he has with him is the truth. And everyone else is upon falsehood. For that reason they support their innovation, even if it leads to them supporting it by way of the sword. No one came with the innovation except that he supported it by way of the sword, as some of the scholars they mentioned, rahimahumullah. Meaning the innovator is always going to support his innovation. Then Hafidh says, if that's clear, the innovation part, then he says, bad memory. The last affair of at-ta'an, criticization of a narrator, is bad memory. Now everyone has at times memory that may fool him. Everyone has at times memory that may fool him. Someone's memory at times fooling him doesn't mean that he's a weak narrator or that he's weak in his narrations reports. For none of us are safe from mistakes in memory. Some of us, our memory may deceive us at times. But what he's talking about here is, for example, someone has chronic bad memory. His memory is completely bad. He has horrible memory and his memory is at all times. Then according to some scholars, they say this is called shadh. Is that correct? What is shadh? Anyone remember what the definition of shadh is? Yes. مخالفة المقبول لمن هو أولى من. Someone who's acceptable reporting in opposition to someone who's more trustworthy than him. That's shadh. As for this definition, the scholars, they say this is something that they mention, but it's not correct. Or at times, bad memory is occasional, or occurs later on due to a reason, and that's called mukhtalit. Ikhtilat, when it comes to the science of hadith, it does not mean free mixing. Free mixing, ikhtilat, free mixing in general means free mixing, but when it comes to the science of hadith, ikhtilat means something totally different. Now, narrator changing could be either that he changed in regards to his memory, or either he became mukhtalit. Now, if he changed regarding to his memory as at taghayyur, that means he forgot some of his knowledge and his memory weakened, and that could be due to a sickness. Sometimes when you get older, your memory becomes weaker and you start to forget the knowledge that you learned before. That is called at-taghayyur. You've had at-taghayyur now, your memory is slowly changing due to either old age or a sickness that may have occurred, and your memory is slowly changing. When it becomes mukhtalit or ikhtilat of a narrator, it means that he's reached the state of becoming a crazy person or a majnoon. Meaning he's lost his senses and he has lost his memory. He's become like a person who is insane. He's become like a person who is insane. And this has occurred to some of the great scholars of Islam. That later on in their age, some of them lost their intellect. Some of them lost their intellect and became to the state of losing their intellect and becoming mukhtalit. Now why does that happen? Some of the scholars they mentioned, it could occur due to old age. Sometimes when a person gets older, he loses his senses and intellect. It can also occur due to severe fear. Some people, due to severe fear, they lose everything. They lose their mind. Also, it could occur to severe harm in his body or sickness. Some people, when they have severe fear, for example, they lose everything. Their mind gets completely lost. They don't know what's going on no more. Similarly, certain harms that may occur to the body, such as something affecting the head or getting hit in the head, may make you lose everything completely. Or something has occurred. For example, some of the scholars, they became mukhtalit when their books burned. When their libraries burnt down, they couldn't carry the burden of their library burning down, and they became mukhtalit. And some of the scholars, the way they were dealt with when that happened, their children would hide them. For example, Ibn Mulaqqin, the great scholar of Islam that wrote one of the biggest explanation of Umdatul Ahkam, they say when his books burned down, he became mukhtalit. When he got to that stage, his sons and children hid him from the community. Why? Because they didn't want him to narrate stuff that were completely wrong, and by way of it, his image would be ruined. So that's how the scholars they dealt with those who became mukhtalit. Now this shows, as Imam Nukhbah says, rahimahullah, that in ikhtilat is a proof that no one should be misled by his understanding or knowledge, because it can change in the moment of a second. Your knowledge and your memory can be taken away from you anytime Allah wants. Allah bless you with this knowledge, and Allah can take whenever He wants. And at times that could be by way of ikhtilat, and you become from those who have no intellect and are majaneen. And thus you lose everything that you strive for in your life. So a person shouldn't be misled by his knowledge and think that this is going to be with him forever. He's always going to be a hafidh al-Quran. He's always going to be hafidh al-Hadith. He's always going to have this knowledge. For it might leave him in a moment of a second by becoming mukhtalit. It happened to great scholars of Islam. So let alone the likes of us. What is the importance of this? Knowing this, narrators that became mukhtalit in the end of their life. Why? Because the authentication and the weakness of a narration is reliant upon it. What does that mean? If a scholar became mukhtalit, you cannot narrate narrations from him after that ikhtilat. Why? Because it's not accepted from him no more. So you have to identify now which narrators relate from him before he reached that stage. If you're able to identify which narrators relate from him before that stage, then it's acceptable from that specific narrator. But if it is said that this narrator only heard from him after ikhtilat, you cannot accept that narration. You can no longer accept that narration because there's problems with it. Then he says, to finish this part of the book, he says, whenever a chronically forgetful reporter is corroborated by a worthy report, meaning they're supporting routes and supporting chains and supporting narrations, like a report of those who are better than him or at the same level, then it is called Hasan li ghayrihi. What does that mean, Hasan li ghayrihi? What does Hasan li ghayrihi mean? Remember, there's Hasan li dhatih and Hasan li ghayrih. Hasan li ghayrihi means what? It is authentic due to supporting route. And Hasan li dhati means it is authentic in of itself. So at times a narration that is because of forgetfulness, or a mastur narration of someone who's unknown, or a mursal report or mudallis, their reports, if they have supporting routes, their narrations become Hasan li ghayrihi. Hasan li ghayrihi. Meaning in of themselves, they're da'if, they're weak. But if they're supporting routes to support them, they become Hasan li ghayrihi. With this, he finishes the reasons for why a narration could be declared weak. We said it goes back to two reasons, as-saqt and ta'an. Either there's a drop in the chain, or a drop somewhere of a narrator, or at-ta'an, where there's a disparagement or a criticism. So we'll quickly review that which we took regarding this affair, since it is of utmost importance in the science of hadith. Mursal. Where is the drop in mursal? Where is the drop in mursal? The Sahabi is dropped, or someone after the Tabi'een is dropped? Which one's better definition? Why? If a Sahabi is dropped, does it affect it? لا كلهم عضول. All of them are trustworthy. So, mursal is when the Tabi'i doesn't mention after him. So, example, a Tabi'i relates from the Prophet ﷺ, is called mursal. Then he says mu'adal. Mu'adal is what? What is mu'adal? Two consecutive narrators are dropped in a chain. This is from the utmost forms of weakness. Munqati'. What is munqati'? Inqita'. A drop anywhere in the chain by one person or more. Mu'allaq. What is mu'allaq? Mu'allaq. Naam. From the author of the book, he completely drops the chain. For example, when he says, Imam Bukhari says, قال Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Al-Bukhari, did he meet the Prophet ﷺ? La, he didn't meet him. But it's called mu'allaq, meaning he dropped the chain. Or example, Bukhari says, قال Aisha radiallahu anha. This is mu'allaq as well, because he قالت Aisha radiallahu anha, because why? It's mu'allaq because he dropped the chain completely. Mudallis. What is mudallis? Is when a narrator narrates with what word? An wa an. Example of a narrator says an fulan, and is someone who is known to hide a trustworthy narrator or weak narrator, and other than that, as we mentioned details of it, is called mudallis. Then ta'an. As for disparagement of the narrators, what is the greatest disparagement a narrator can have? What is the worst thing a narrator can do in regards to being criticized? What is it? Kadhib, lying. The worst thing a narrator can have is that he's a liar. If he's a liar, what is his narrations called? La. Mawdu'. The worst form of narrator is a liar. And his narration called mawdu', fabricated. What about matruk? What kind of narrator is he? He's accused of what? He's accused of lying. The one who's accused of lying is number 2. So lying is extremely bad. For a narrator to be accused of lying or be known as a liar, that is extremely bad. Their narrations are rejected. The next one is fuhsh al-ghalat. Someone who commits many big mistakes. He commits big mistakes, his narrations are rejected as well. One who is careless, he has ghafla, his narrations are rejected as well. Also a fasiq, an evildoer, his narration not accepted. Why? Because he cannot be trusted with the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, and he's an evildoer. Waham, confusion, if it occurs often, his narration are rejected. But if it comes sometimes, who is not confused in life? At times, confusion may occur to anyone in life. But if his confusion is often, then his narration are rejected. Number 7 is mukhalafa. Opposition. You oppose those who are trustworthy more than you. You oppose them in narrations. You oppose them in the number. Or example, you oppose them in different wordings. These are all mukhalafa. That makes a narration weak. Number 8 is jahala, not being known. Number 9 is bid'ah. And number 10 is having bad memory. These are asbab al-ta'n. These are the reasons for why a narrator could be disparaged and a narrator's narrations could be declared weak. Now, as we mentioned before, this is extremely important for you to understand that a narration is either weak due to as-saqt, a drop in the chain, or due to at-ta'n, or due to a disparagement or criticization of the criticism of the narrator. If you have these two, then the narration is declared weak. Then the narration is declared weak. In general, the authentic narration has 5 conditions. What are they? What are the 5 conditions of a sahih narration? Connected chain, ittisal sanad. طيب, what else? Yes. Adala, what else? Dabt, precision, what else? What's the 2 things you cannot have in a narration to be authentic? Illa qadiha, in a hidden defect that affects the chain. And the last one? Huh? What was that? Irregularities, shadh. The next one is shadh, irregularities. These 5 conditions must be present. 3 of them must be present, and 2 of them must not be present for narration to be authentic. A narration either sahih li dhatih, authentic by itself, or sahih li ghayrihi, authentic by way of supporting routes, or hasan li dhatih, hasan by itself, or hasan li ghayrihi, hasan by supporting routes, or da'if. These asbab of ta'n and as-saqt make a narration weak. But at times with supporting routes, al-mutaba'at wa shawahid, and by doing i'tibar, you can raise the weakness of a narration to hasan li ghayrihi, or at times even hasan li dhatin other than that. That is the importance of understanding these affairs. Now before I end, I want to mention just a benefit that we were asked about before we stopped, about the narration of Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, about him having the reason why some narration mentions 60, or some narration mentions 70, or some 100. Subhanallah. One sec. Subhanallah, I thought I saved it. So the narration where he said that لا طوفن الليل على 100 امرأة أو 99, that I'm going to today sleep with 100 of my wives, or 100 women, and in some narration mentions 99. Other narrations come that it mentions 90. Other narrations come that it mentions 60. Other narrations, they come with different numbers. So how do you do jama'? How do you do reconciliation between these narrations? Al-Hafidh ibn Hajr rahimahullah, he mentions in Fath al-Bari, فَمَحْسُولِ الرِّوَايَات, what we get from these narrations, and this is the benefit of learning science of hadith. 60 wa 70. In some narrations we have 60, and some narrations we have 70. Some of them 90, and some of them 99, which is 99, and some 100. وَالْجَمْ بَيْنَهَا أَنَّ 60 كُنَّ حَرَائِرْ. 60 of them will be free women. وَمَا زَادَ عَلَيْهِنَّ كُنَّ سَرَارِ أو بالعكس. And that which was increased on them was a slave woman. Or it could be the opposite. وَأَمَّا 70 فَلِلْمُبَالَغَةِ. As for 70, then it is over emphasizing it. وَأَمَّا 90 وَالْمِئَةِ فَكُنَّ دُونَ الْمِئَةِ وَفَوْقَ 90. Why they mentioned 90 وَالْمِئَةِ? That they were more than 90 but lesser than 100. فَمَنْ قَالَ 90 أَلْغَى الْقَصْرِ. What does that mean? Those who said 90, they rounded it off to 90. They didn't want to increase it to 100, so they rounded off to 90. وَمَنْ قَالَ 100 جَبَّرُهَا أَكْمَلَ الْقَصْرِ. Those who said 100, they increased it or rounded it up to 100. The ones who did 9, they rounded it back to 90. وقد حكى وهب منبه في المبتدأ أنه كان لسليمان 1000 امرأة 300, that he had 100 women, 100 wives, and 300 slaves, or 100 wives, 1,000 wives, and 700 slaves. عليه الصلاة والسلام. And that's not far-fetched because the Prophet from the Prophets of Allah, and in his Sharia was different. And Allah gave him quwwah, the strength to do so, to have that many women. In our Sharia, the most you can have, obviously, is 4 at one time. But this is how some of the scholars do jump between them, that they round up the numbers one way, or they round it down another way. Or they say that 60 were free women, and the rest were all slave women, other than that. Showing us that the scholars, they have different ways of doing jam. They have different ways of doing reconciliation between the different narrations. At times it may be that one narration is weak, and at times it may be that another narration is stronger. But we said if you can keep both narrations the way they are, and not weaken one because of the other, then you do al-jama'. Then you do al-jama' and you combine between them and try to explain the difference between all of them. We'll stop with this much. If there's any quick question, we'll take it now. If not, we'll continue next week, inshallah.